Welcome to the Books on Air podcast. I'm Suzanne Harris, and my listeners get the story behind every book. Joining me today is Ralph Saucier Sr., and he's here to talk about his book, The History of the Progressive Movement in the United States and How Liberalism Has Created a Mediocre Society. Ralph, it's such a pleasure to have you today. Thank you for joining me on Books on Air.
Well, thank you.
I'm curious. Every book has two stories. There's the story or the information that the reader gets when they read the book. But then there's always a story behind the book that the reader never knows. They never know how the book came to be. So what made you decide to write a book titled The History of the Progressive Movement in the United States and How Liberalism Has Created a Mediocre Society? Where'd that come from?
That basically came from many years. I've been through politics. I was a campaign manager in Connecticut for Jane Milliero in the 6th District, and I was on the Republican Town Committee for 23 years. And I've followed politics, and I've followed different presidents, since Eisenhower. And as the years went by, I've seen the country, or I've seen the citizens of the United States, getting more, but not be able to earn more. And although they may have earned more, it was going back to the government. And I don't think people totally realize that. And the message of the book was basically to bring out all the different programs that have come out in the past 100, 120 years to show where their money is going and do they want to continue doing that. So that is basically what got me to write the book.
How'd you do your research? That sounds like a tremendous amount of work and research and study.
It took me about 3 years, and in the bibliography of the book, you can see I researched and read a lot of books and studied a lot from it. I did not just go from myself. That's why the book was written, and emphasized, and it shows my comments, and it shows where the research is that I've done in the book. So the research came actually from the actual books themselves. That I'm sitting here with a big library in front of me, and I'm an advocate type of reader. I read a lot, and I just finished a couple of books, and I'm ready to start a couple more. And besides writing, I like to read. So in my years, I just seem to feel that I don't believe the American public is well educated in what's happened in the past.
You've got 3 presidents that you've chosen to put on the cover. I was curious, why those 3 presidents?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
Well, Theodore Roosevelt, okay, he's the first president that really came to being where he took advantage of government programs and basically the Park Department and a few other departments or commissions that he started. And it had to be government funding that did that. Now, he's not considered a really, real progressive, but he's the first one to have been able to take advantage of, government finances to start programs as the Park Department. Woodrow Wilson, if you read my book and go through it, he is the father of progressiveness. He came out one program after another, and basically in 1913, he started the 16th Amendment. He cut the tariff coming into the country because the tariff was not enough money to support the government as he wanted to see it grow. So, he started the income tax with the 16th Amendment. And that's where the real progressive movement started. Many people, I guess conservative people and Republicans, look at him as the father of the progressive movement. And of course, I put Donald Trump on there basically one reason. He created a lot of programs, but what a lot of people do not realize that are real strong supporters of Donald Trump, all these things that he did, it did cost money and the deficit in this country did rise, but it was pretty well covered by the way he did the income tax break for people, and he continued to have a lot of different programs, and they're good programs, some of them, but the fact is they did cost us money. So he had Donald Trump's background, although he was a Republican. If you check his history, he was a pretty diehard Democrat, So that's the reason the three are on there.
So give me an overview. Let's give our listeners sort of an overview of what the book covers, because this is a tremendous amount of information, right?
Well, yes. It basically covers 120 years from 1900 to the present time, and it covers also the present time. But basically, if you look at the book and go through each one of the presidents I did cover, you'll find out which president carried this country more into the progressive movement, into different programs. And each one of the presidents called their program, something different. They had a name for it. And I emphasize that. And in that area, I also emphasize what those programs were.
What are some of the high points that you think are the most important for the reader?
The high points for most of the readers, well, number one, again, I kind of reiterate the programs that each president had and what it cost the American taxpayer. None of these programs are free. A lot of people say, "Oh, gee, look, I'm getting this from the government. I'm going to get this. I'm going to get that." Somebody's got to pay for it. Many Americans don't totally realize that the progressive have to be paid for, okay? And who's going to pay for it? It's going to be the American people. That's basically the strong message that I put across. And also, where do they fit in on this? Do they want to keep paying for it, or do they just feel like, hey, it's got to stop somewhere?
When you were writing the book, did you have a reader in mind? Were you thinking about who the person would be that would read your book?
That's a good question, Suzanne. Yes, my hope of who would be reading the book are people from 18 to 40, 45. Most of the people beyond that age are pretty well set in how they think and what they do, and how they feel about politics. But I don't believe the younger generation is totally aware of what the political atmosphere in this country is. They come out of college or they come out of school, and most of the schools and colleges, they kind of teach one side of the political atmosphere. So I was hoping that the younger generation, the younger people.
Is there a part of the book, Ralph, that you would like to share with the listeners?
As much as I didn't have a lot to say about it at the end, in that last chapter about President Biden, the fact of the matter is that we have to look at what's happening in this country right now, and I sort of emphasize that in the last chapter on President Biden. That the fact of the matter, I asked the question, what do we have now? Okay. The United States will either survive the last century of progressiveness by someone with difficulty political philosophy getting elected to office, or continue along a path of becoming a socialistic country. The more the government gives, the more they want, and the more that we will take and lean towards socialism. And that's really the message on that, that I'd like to leave it.
I'm sure that we have titillated our listeners, and they're curious about where they can find the book. So let me give them the title of the book and do a little spelling so that they'll know where they can find it. It is on Amazon, so all you have to do is go to Amazon, and the title of the book is The History of the Progressive Movement in the United States and How Liberalism Has Created a Mediocre Society, by Ralph, R-A-L-P-H-E, Saucier, S-A-U-C-I-E-R. Now, you can buy it. It's Kindle, it's hardback, it's paperback. There are all kinds of options to buy it there on Amazon. But I also know, Ralph, that it's available other places. Tell me where else the listener could go buy the book.
Well, at Barnes & Noble, their store, and also the website. And also at on my website, which is www.sausierbooks.com, SAUCIERBOOKS.com. So
what else? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, I was going to say those are the main places. And of course, if you buy them on SAUCIERBooks.com, you'll get the honor of me signing the book.
See, I think that's terrific, because who doesn't want to have the author's signature in a book that they're reading? I think that's a great thing that you're doing, offering them that opportunity. So right. Congratulations on doing that. I think it's wonderful.
Well, thank you.
What else will they find when they go to your website? Now, this is not the only book that you've written. So let's talk about some other things that are there on the website.
Well, back a few years ago, I kind of used my experience in organization, and I have a master's in organizational psychology, and I used it to kind of put my past years' experience together, and I wrote a book, Success Through Behavioral Change. It's basically a book, a lot of it's intended for younger people where they can be successful. It's having faith and a feeling and a goal, and to write that goal down. And basically have, every 4 or 5 years change a goal, and, as you're moving on. I've sold quite a few of those books, actually, and it's been a pretty successful book. And, of course, and then the other book is sort of, the history of my childhood and myself, if people want to know more about me. Because my family, my father's side of the family were the first ones to settle in northern Maine. And my mother's side of the family, they came down from Canada. They were granted some land from King Louis at that time, and Marie Antoinette, and they settled in northern Maine. They had, they call it a plantation, because they had 5 farms. So it kind of goes back to my history and comes up to where I am today.
Sounds fascinating. Not many people can trace their ancestry back like that and come up with such a terrific, interesting background. Good job.
Yeah, I've always been interested in my family and what it's done, because I used to hear my father talk about his grandfather and his father before then and all that, and it just it's always piqued my interest.
What made you decide to start writing in the first place? Authors start for all kinds of reasons. I mean, sometimes they're in school and a teacher recognizes that there's some sort of talent and encourage them. Sometimes they read another writer's work and they go, oh, I'd like to write like this. Let me see if I can do that. Or sometimes there's an event that happens in their life that either in a positive way or a negative way, and they feel like it's important that they share that event. What started you writing, Ralph, and how old were you?
I've always written. When I was a manufacturing engineer for a corporation, I used to write manuals for instructions and for people in the factory and how to perform certain operations. And when I kind of moved on in life a bit and got a little bit older, I had a lot of writing from manuscripts, and I used to do a seminar for people on how to motivate themselves in Connecticut. And every Tuesday night I did a seminar, and I used to get like 25, 30 people. And I used to have a lot of notes, a tremendous amount of notes from the seminars. And back, I think about 2005, 2006, I'm looking at all these notes. They're piled in front of me. So I started to ask myself, what am I going to do with this? And my wife looked at me and says, why don't you write a book? I just looked at her because I never thought in my life I I thought myself as a writer or a researcher or anything like that. I mean, I got three different degrees, but I just it was basically to get ahead in industry and stuff like that. So I had all these notes and all these background, and I was doing the seminars that I had a lot of notes from, and I started to compile them, and that put my first book together. And after I finished my first book, and then I wrote a book of my family, and then I turned around and I just kind of felt like, I was looking at what was happening in the world today and everything, and I just felt, I just got to put this on paper. And this book here took me 3 years, actually, for the research and the reading I've done. I've done a tremendous amount of research and reading for this book.
Have you learned anything about yourself that you didn't expect when you started writing?
Oh, God. That's a good question. I think when you write, and you write a couple books, I believe that it kind of builds confidence in your ability to translate to people and to communicate with people. I think writing is probably one of the best forms of communications that there is. And that's what I've learned about myself. Although I was a general manager in a corporation and I was an executive in my life, I communicated with people that were kind of my level or people that worked for me. But this is a different. I'm looking to communicate with the outside world, and I think that's what it teaches you.
I agree. I think when someone begins to write, and let's face it, writing anything is not easy. And you do find out things about yourself that you didn't really realize before because it's just a different process. And, so many counselors will talk about keeping journals and that if someone is having difficulty sitting down and writing down what's going on with themselves, changes things and changes how they look at whatever it is. I think it's extremely powerful. And I'm always interested in how authors feel about themselves after they've started writing, because it changes you, don't you think?
It gives you a sense of confidence.
I like that.
That you don't remember, because when I was a kid, if you read my first book, I kind of talked about it a little bit. I stammered something terrible and had a hard time communicating with people in class and even with my mother. And through the years, and this was this also initiated the first book about having faith in yourself and having faith in God, and just kind of moving ahead and having that kind of faith that you feel you can do anything. And I never thought when I got out of high school that I would ever write books. I'd ever be a manager. All of a sudden, I was working at a company running machines, and I just said, I can't do this the rest of my life, And so I started going to college, and I continued college, and I got three degrees and I give my wife a lot of credit. My wife has been tremendous inspiration for me. Absolutely phenomenal inspiration.
That's a great answer. I'm so glad you said those things, because I'm sure that there are people who are listening to us who might think, well, wait a minute. He didn't believe he could do it, and he did, so maybe I can too. So thank you for sharing that. That's very personal, and I really appreciate that. I want to get back to the history of the Progressive Movement book for a moment. Our listeners will become readers, and they'll purchase a copy of the book. This is not the kind of book that you just sit down and read cover to cover. This is the kind of book that you sit down and you read part of it, and then you think about what you read, and then you go back and you may reread some passages. But this is a kind of book that you will keep for years, and that you'll read back through the information and you'll refer back to it. But you will read the whole book. When the reader, finishes that very last page, Ralph, and they close that back cover, what's the real bottom line message that you want them to leave with?
Well, I think the important thing, after reading this book, you have to ask a major question. Where are we going in this country, and how will I fit in? And how will I vote in the future? And it's actually, what is it that I want for myself, my family, and my country? Am I the type of patriotic person that will only do what's best for myself or the country or exactly what? So I think it's important for people to, when they get done reading this, understand where their philosophy fits into the rest of the country's. That's basically what I'd like to see.
I think that that's exactly what people will think when they finish the book. Ralph, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for sharing your personal ideas and for sharing your book with us. It's been a pleasure to talk to you today.
Well, it was a pleasure talking to you, Suzanne. I really appreciate this.
Now remember, you can find The History of the Progressive Movement in the United States and How Liberalism Has Created a Mediocre Society by Ralph E. Saucier, Saucier, on Amazon or on Ralph's website. You've been listening to the Books on Air podcast brought to you on webtalkradio.net. You can also hear this podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Stitcher. I'm Suzanne Harris, and I hope you'll join me for our next Books on Air podcast, because remember, you never know who's going to be here, and you never know what we're going to talk about. Thank you so much for listening.